Well shit, I wake up and it's archived. Guess I'll take that extra chromosome now. Sorry to have posted in the wrong thread, like I said I was severely drunk and fucked up. We stood there as the fire smoldered to coals, and the sun finally began to make its way over the ridge illuminating the valley below. It was dawning on me just how fucked I am as well as the cooling piss on my pants. This thing can hide in trees and take 2 different loads from a 12 gauge. It was obvious now, we had to avoid groups of trees and stay in open fields if we wanted to get out of here. Of course, that's easier said than done, when many of the open areas are loose basalt scree fields, and steep hillsides. However, it seemed that it preferred to attack in the dark and hopefully I gave it a healthy fear of guns. Keeping all of this in mind, we moved with purpose, doing my best to avoid stands of trees, but keeping my eyes trained on them, hoping to spot any irregularities. I've never moved like that and for so long before. My thighs burned as we moved up and over the next spur, and my knees ached as we descended into the following draw. The closer we got to our 4-wheeled savior, the more the area opened up, exposing what must have been old range land. Although our pace was much faster compared to the initial trip, the sun was slowly making its predetermined arch westward toward the horizon. Now the decision of either hunkering down for the night or keep running weighed heavy in my mind. What worked in the past had to be a fluke. No way would a predator approach me in the same exact way again. But, if I keep running, that could be exactly what it wants. I knew that I had to rely on Saxon as a warning system, and right now he had his ears pressed down, and kept his head low as he kept pace with me. He and I were now the prey, and I think we both relied upon each other in order to survive the quickly approaching night. The clock was ticking down now as daylight was fast approaching its end. It didn't feel right, but I was optimistic that posting up on a spur and making a big enough fire would keep it at bay. But gathering firewood was a fucking gamble, and time was no longer on my side. We ran until finally our salvation was found. A large open field with a few small Douglas firs and a big downed cottonwood. This cottonwood was long dead but must have fallen during the winter due to the heavy snowfall. It had shattered into what seemed like 1,000 pieces, with limbs and bits of trunk scattering into a shape, making a facsimile of a tree still full of life. Dragging limbs into the makeshift fire pit, I wanted to build up a fire big enough to attract the attention of forest rangers, sheriff deputies, fuck even some high school kids looking to get drunk. Something I should have remembered with poplar wood, is when they burn hot and bright, but not for long. But I was sure this big girl had more than enough material to last me the night. Once again, the thin wisps of light from the retreating sun hovered over the far-off western ridge, giving way to the eventual twilight. However, my fire was a symbol of defiance against the encroaching night. Its flames licked at the quickly cooling air, and its light gave me reassurance. For a moment I felt a connection to humans long past, who upon harnessing the power of fire became masters of their domain, no longer fearing the long nights and unseen foes. But I was a product of modernity, an alien to this environment where my survival wasn't guaranteed, and I was finally understanding that. I looked over to Saxon, who had at one point fallen asleep in the gentle heat of the fire, exhausted from our experience. This feeling of relief, although fleeting, was exactly what my body needed, to allow my muscles to finally relax, and my mind to focus on nothing. I laughed at the realization that this is how a long backpacking trip should feel. I'm not sure how long our friend let us relax and become distracted. Maybe it was a strategy to lull us into a sense of false security, or maybe it just wanted to take its time and savor the hunt. I don't know. Over the crackle of the flames I finally heard the sharp snap of a tree limb unable to sustain the weight forced upon it. Saxon immediately jumped up, ears like radar dishes feverishly scanning the trees to our west. I was copying him, standing in front of the flames scanning the trees for anything that stood out. Nothing looked different. Just the dying wind of the evening, and the pop of a poplar limb in the fire. Probably doing the dumbest thing since actually coming up here, I bellowed out a howl of frustration at our unseen stalker. After bellowing my rage and defiance into the inky blackness, I stood there taking deep breaths, and looked down at Saxon, who was staring up at me with a perplexed expression. His attention was quickly taken off me, as his nostrils flared, sucking in the air around us. Again, it only took a few moments until I was graced with the scent of its musk. My stomach turned, not because of the odor, but from the fact we were thrown back into this nightmare. Saxon was still looking intently into the woods, straining at his leash and barking into the unseen. I decided to join him, but instead with the carbine. It was honestly just a spray and pray scenario, sending round after round into the woods. It's scary how quickly 33 rounds can be sent down range, when you're under pressure. I only snapped out of it when the expected bang was replaced by the click of the trigger. My ears were ringing, but the overwhelming smell of burnt powder brought a modicum of relief. This confidence caused me to look down to change out the magazine. After releasing the bolt, I looked up, and the all too familiar glints of eyes were staring at us. It might have been just my mind playing tricks on me, but they seemed to be moving. Almost gliding, as it made its way south and down the hill. I was again paralyzed by the predatory gaze of something unknown, with all rational thought thrown to the wayside. Saxon was silent as well. We were both frozen in place, terrified and in an almost grotesque awe. It took too long for me to realize, but this fucking thing was cutting off my escape route. In a disgusting parody of Saxon and I in the snowfield, it made an arch downhill. But rather than an effort to escape, it was tightening the noose. Looking back, I don't know if this was a sign of intelligence or instinct, but that feeling of hopelessness drained the strength from me. At that moment, all those days of running and trudging up and down hills hit me like a 5-ton sack of shit. I didn't know what to do anymore. I was so absolutely over my head now, and ready to give up. That's when Saxon put his massive between my legs, and looked up at me with those big dopey eyes. At that moment, I knew that it wasn't about me, but about my companion, who had stuck with me, and had been my teammate through this fucking nightmare. So that was it, no more hasty decisions that might put Saxon and I in danger. Cue the fucking Sabaton boys, this might just be our last stand. Again we played the same game as last night, but instead of coming in close, it only stayed in the perimeter of the tree line, unwilling to expose itself in the light of the fire. Every so often that Eisheim would vanish only to reappear dozens of feet away, and every time it would send chills down my spine. Every so often, I would crack off a few 9mm rounds to try and scare it, but the amount of ammo I had was dwindling, and it only seemed to get bolder. And the amount of energy I had was now matching my reserves of ammo. I was fighting sleep, catching myself stumbling. I finally allowed myself to sit for the first time in what felt like hours. This next part feels like a blur now, but I'm going to recount it as best as possible. I remember looking up at the stars, feeling a little delirious. I looked back down at the fire, mesmerized by the shifting colors of the coals, when out of the corner of my eye I spotted the faintest pinpoint of light in the distance. I honestly had no idea what it was for a few brief seconds, until I realized it was 2 dots of lights. Headlights? No, the service road can't be that close by. They must have turned a corner around a bend, because they disappeared for what felt like an eternity, until they're materialized again. I had almost forgotten about the tree line, and when I looked up, that pair of eyes seemed much closer now. Did it see the headlights too? Or maybe it took advantage of me breaking eye contact. I didn't and still don't know, but I knew that it was do or die soon and I had to make a decision. My head kept going side to side, trying to spot the headlights again and maintaining eye contact with it. As I looked into the woods after losing those eyes in the darkness, a circle of light suddenly illuminated the tree line, quickly scanning the open field, making its way towards me. I couldn't believe it and looked back to the road. There sat a truck with a spotlight panning over the field, until I was hit with an absolutely blinding light. I blinked the stars out of my eyes for a few seconds, and without a moment's hesitation I grabbed my Kel-Tec, slung my shotgun, and grabbed Saxon's leash. Fuck my pack, and everything else, we're making a break for it. I remember sprinting downhill, partially illuminated by the spotlight, screaming and waving my free hand frantically. I looked back for a split second and saw a shapeless blur pass right by my fire. I ran harder, Saxon easily keeping pace with me as we made our way downhill toward the truck. As we got closer, I could hear the rumble of the engine, and then a voice called out, "What's with all the shooting out here, son?" My only response was a girly-ass scream, followed by the scream of the thing chasing us. "What the fuck was that?" screamed the driver as Saxon and I reached the truck. I remember throwing this 80-pound dog into the truck bed and launching myself in right behind him. "We gotta go, please turn this fucking thing around." I guess the trembling in my voice as I yelled along with that monstrous cry must have convinced him, since the truck began to turn around, kicking up loose gravel and illuminating a white arch with its headlights. As we made the last of the turn, the spotlight still pointed perpendicular to the truck illuminated for a split second our friend standing in the road. It must have been right behind the truck, ready to pluck Saxon and I out of the bed before the truck started to move. But in that split second of light, I saw it hunched over, hiding its head from the blinding light. Its pinkish gray skin was pulled tight over a thin frame of bones, with limbs disproportional to its body pulled up tight, and like a spring launched itself off the road down into the valley below. And that was it, that was the last of it. I laid down in that truck bed, bouncing in that steel coffin as the driver did the best he could to avoid the larger potholes. It felt like it didn't take all that long until we came to a stop with the headlights illuminating my truck, which felt small now in comparison. As I loaded Saxon into my truck, the driver kept trying to get my attention, but I just didn't have the desire to talk to this guy. I feel bad now for giving my rescuer the cold shoulder, but as I climbed into my truck I remember him yelling something to the effect of, "That was one of the freakiest cougars I've ever seen, man." He then revved his engine and drove off. As I drove home, I kept thinking over and over again, if what I saw was a cougar. Even writing this I still wonder, was it a diseased cougar that fared poorly over the winter and saw Saxon and I as easy prey? Or was it something else, something that shouldn't exist? With my zero artistic talent, I drew up what I had been trying to suppress for years. Drawing up what I was that morning, and later in the road. Thanks for listening /x/. I hope maybe I can finally come to peace with this whole experience.